a great American in whose symbolic shadow we stand today, signed the Emancipation Proclamation. This momentous decree came as a great beacon light of hope to millions of Negro slaves who had been seared in the flames of withering injustice. It came as a joyous daybreak to end the long night of their captivity. But 100 years later, the Negro still is not free.
And welcome. Thank you so much for joining us for our police reform and social justice panel discussion. I'm Natalie Graves-Tucker, your host, and I'm here with a few distinguished gentlemen from the Washington Baptist Theological Seminary. And we're going to be talking about how the church responds to police reform and these protests about systemic racism and police brutality. So with us, I have Dr. John L. McCoy, the president of the Washington Baptist Theological Seminary, Dr. Clevester O. Wimbish, the dean of the Washington Baptist Theological Seminary. We have Reverend Ken Thomas Sr., who's a professor at the Washington Baptist Theological Seminary. And we have Dr. John Robinson Jr., who's a professor of missionology at the Washington Baptist Theological Seminary. Thank you for joining us. So my first question is, what part does the seminary and other Christian educational institutions play in the protest movement to end police brutality and systemic racism in America? Dr. McCoy, would you like to start?
Yes, but perhaps we need to go back to the history in terms of the Washington Baptist Seminary. The Washington Baptist Seminary was founded in 1926, and in the history of the school, we've had 3 presidents. The first, of course, was J.L.S. Holloman, who served as president from 1926 to 1971. Then we had Dr. Andrew Fowler, who served as president of our school from 1972 until his passing in 2003. I was selected by the trustee board to become 3rd president in the history of the school. And we say that because the Washington Baptist Seminary has a history of being involved in social justice issues. And so therefore we thought it apropos that we define our policy and our position as relates to the systemic racism in America, particularly the current ongoing protest that's not only engulfing the streets of our nation but around the world. And so therefore we thought it necessary for us to gather here and to share from an educational perspective the importance of our school speaking to these issues. And so therefore we believe that the Washington Baptist Seminary and all Christian educational institutions have to address these ongoing issues. For us to be silent, I believe, is for us to negate our duty as educators to speak to these issues. And so I'll allow other colleagues to chime in from this point.
Thank you. Dr. Wimbish?
Yes, the Christian educational ministries and schools and seminaries, we have a divine obligation to impart truth to people and to break down and to uncover the lies that that racism is built upon. And so our responsibility to the community of people is to share with them to all of the lies that's racism used to perpetuate their own interests or people's own interests to kind of keep people as subjects and not share in the privileges and the blessings of a country that that is so rich. Racism is just covered with lies and stereotypes, and it's our responsibility as teachers and ministers and pastors to share the truth with people. That's what's going to really make us free.
Thank you, Dr. Wimbish.
I think that as a Christian instructor, that we need to rethink how we are going to present lessons that will help individuals reshape the narrative of bringing a solution to the protest. Because protesting is one thing, but then after protesting, there need to be a plan, and then there need to be execution. And so I think the seminary need to be involved in the plan and the execution so that it can be more effective in approaching the matters that we're dealing with today. In doing so, I think that, of course, now that protests have gotten the attention of the nation, I think that all theological institutions need to understand the obligation as a servant of God, that we too ought to be depositing information in our students and in the people that we pastor, so that they'll be able to have some clarity on the issues. Because a lot of times we get stuck with the protesting, and then we don't have a plan after, and we don't have any execution that comes behind that. And so I think that's one of the things that we ought to do as a Christian church and a Christian institution.
That's important. Thank you for that. Reverend Thomas?
I think that, first of all, I agree with those previous to me. But I think as a Christian education institution, we're responsible for imparting knowledge and truth.
Right.
And I think that when we accomplish that, we will also accomplish understanding. I believe that a knowledge without understanding or knowledge without truth is actually worthless, because we have to be able to understand that truth is the center of everything going forward. We've lived with so many lies, and the seminary, Washington Baptist Seminary, has proven to depart truth to its students. When you leave here, you have issues because now you know the truth, and you want everyone to know the truth. So when you live in a world full of lies and you begin to pass on the truth, it makes people uncomfortable. But we have to push that. The truth, understanding, and knowledge is what's going to take us forward, I believe.
Thank you for that. Dr. McCoy, you had something?
Yes, and just to follow up, Brother Thomas, the Bible tells us that my people are destroyed for lack of knowledge. And it is a proven fact that African-American people, as well as persons of European descent, do not have the knowledge of the history of African-American persons, nor the history of racism in America. We believe that the history is grounded, as was indicated, in a body of untruths. Jane Elliott, a noted educator, once said that it is impossible for a white child to attend the public school system in America and not be prejudiced, and it is possible for a black child to attend the public school system in America and not develop a self-prejudice. In other words, a white child attends the public school system in America reading the history books that are Eurocentric. A white child will attend that school and determine in his mind that we must be superior because we've done everything. According to the history books, we've done everything to build America. We have done everything that makes America so-called great. And the black child will attend the same school and read the same history books and feel inferior because those books indicate that he and his people has not done anything. And so therefore, as Jesus said, ye shall know the truth, and the truth shall make you free. And I believe that much of the problem with America is that most Americans do not know the truth. Neither white Americans don't know the truth because they are reading flawed historical material, and sadly, too many African Americans don't know the truth as to who we are as a people. And so therefore, we stand upon the fact that Jesus said, ye shall know the truth, and the truth shall make you free.
Thank you so much.
Yes, just to say just a little bit more, it was Carter G. Woodson in his book, The Miseducation of the Negro, and how true that is, because as we stated, some of the knowledge that's taught does not have, sometimes it may have some facts. Facts are always not, all facts are not always true. And so seminary and other churches and teachers, we have a responsibility to break down some of this knowledge that we have received, because it's not benefiting us. As Carter G. Woodson said, we are our grandfathers and our grandmothers had little education, but they had money, they had land. Today, we have more education than our grandparents. We have BA degrees, we have master's degrees, and doctor's degree, and we are this high in debt. And so Carter G. Woodson said something was wrong with the education. And we believe what's wrong with the education. There's a lot of true history is not being taught. And so at the Washington Baptist Theological Seminary, all of us are engaged in teaching history not from a European perspective, but from a historical African Americans and what they said. We need to see what they have said instead of just reading everything of European. Amos Wilson, great psychologist, said that he wrote the book, The Falsification of African Consciousness. And he said if a person can manipulate your history, they can manipulate you. And so we're trying, we do feel the responsibility to break history down and to deconstruct what's been constructed in us through Europeans, and then break it down so that we can reconstruct it, and so it'll be honest, truthful, and fair. And we know any country will make their history seem more than what it is. We just want the truth.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for the robust answers just the first question. So, all right, moving on. Except for a few notable incidents, the white evangelical church has been virtually silent on this issue. So how should we view these Christians when the Bible teaches us that Christ was a revolutionary who fought for the least, the lost, and the left out in society?
Well, let me say first, I don't see how anybody can call themselves a Christian and read the Bible that is the Christian book and turn a face from the issue that we are facing today, when we know and say you love Jesus, when first of all, Jesus, when he was born in the middle of racial tension. There was racial tension when he was born. Secondly, he was born poor. And so, I mean, when we start looking at how he was born and the condition of the world when he was born, he was more like us than any other people. He was born in the middle of racial tension. He was born poor, and he was born a minority. He was born a minority where Rome had dominated Palestine and depressed them to a point where people were oppressed and depressed, but yet, you know, Jesus came with a message, and the Bible is a book of liberation. And so I don't see how anybody can read the same book that we call the Bible, that associate us or identify us as Christians, and turn their face from the truth that Reverend Thomas talked about, turn their face from the truth and not deal with that. You know, we can't pick and choose what we're going to use or what we're going to live out of the Bible. You know, it's not something that is a choice for us as a Christian. It is something. It's not something that's like a buffet line. You pick and choose, you know. But we have to take what God gives us in His Word, and we have to execute and put that in action. Amen. And so I don't understand how, and that's for any congregation, be it African American, be it white evangelical, no matter. If you call yourself a Christian, we have to abide by certain principles and certain rules that the Bible gives us that we ought to live by.
Amen.
Yes, the white church has supported, or they are supported racism and slavery from the beginning here in America. They have been complicit. As a book that I'm reading, and I've read, Tisby's book, it talks about the compromise. White church is silent, or they actually, when you go back to in history, even from the time of slavery, 1619, it was the church was complicit in making laws that supported slavery and racism, and those. So the white church continues to support slavery, continues to support racism by their silence. We are, as the Bible says, sisters and brothers, white churches need to speak up, white pastors. Some of them are.
That's true.
Many of them are still silent. And this silence has been killing us. It's good to know today that there are many white people now who are behind the Black Lives Movement, or Black Lives Matter movement. We've been waiting for this time. And now this time is upon us, and as Dr. Robinson has said, we support the young people and those that are out there protesting. This is our time. This is America's time. If America is going to be a nation that will shine above all nations, then we have to learn how to love one another and treat one another as equal. Dr. King says, we're either going to live together as brothers and sisters, or we're going to die as fools. And so we're asking the white churches, they have a responsibility too to speak out against racism. But that's what we're doing, and we hope that others will join us.
Okay, thank you.
And I'm going to become a little more radical in my answer to that question. I think it's impossible for I believe there's a paradox between that phrase, conservative Christianity. I don't know what, as Christians, needs to be conserved.
Absolutely.
And so therefore I see it is impossible for the brand of Christianity that is espoused with the white evangelicals today to be considered Christian in nature. When we read Luke 4, chapter 18, Jesus came for the poor, the the lost, the bruised. And I do not see the white evangelical churches truly focused on these groups of people. We are taught that Jesus and God is always on the side of the oppressed, and he is against the oppressor. I think this goes back to recent American history, where Jimmy Carter comes in and he espouses a liberal Christianity, and then as a backlash to Jimmy Carter, the conservative right was determined to elect a conservative president, and therefore they elected Ronald Reagan, who was a conservative. And I believe that this signaled the end of Christianity in regards to the white evangelical church. Jerry Falwell introduced this term moral majority, and we see that they were certainly not moral, and I'm not certain that they were the majority. But that was the dominant thought in the 70s and 80s, and it is still lingering now in the 21st century. W.E.B. Du Bois, in 1905, in his treatise, Souls of Black Folk, talked about the fact that the issue of race would be the dominant issue in the 20th century. And certainly it was, and it is lingering into the 21st century. So to answer your question, I cannot see in my study of the Bible how you can be a conservative Christian. But we are seeing now that the right wing of the evangelical movement is seeking to conserve something that is destroying the very fabric of America. And we as a school must speak truth to power, because too long we have given in and been silent. And therefore I believe that any gospel preacher who is silent on the issues plaguing this country and tearing this country apart cannot be truly Christian.
No, thank you for that. Reverend Thomas, and then I'll come back to you, Dr. Brown.
I think that, so Christianity, to be a Christian is a lifestyle. So we have in this society, we have many titles: white evangelical, white Christians, black Christians. But Jesus talked about believers that are followers of him, Christians being believers. Like Dr. McCoy said, according to the Bible, there's no in-between. There's no middle ground. Jesus said, either you are or you aren't. He says, you choose me or you choose the world. And so for these other schools to teach anything other than the truth, they're wrong. You can't be a Christian today, and because your parents raised you to accept racism, you not be a Christian tomorrow when you see me being beat half to death and think that I deserve it because of my skin color. Racism is a learned behavior. It's not something that is instilled in you from birth. It is a learned behavior.
Right.
You're being taught how to hate, and hate is a terrible thing. It's like cancer, and it just continues to eat. It never finishes, and everyone that we come in contact with, it eats into them as well. So for us to say white evangelicals have been silent all this time, but then there are some of the churches that have been silent with the truth. But it's going to be the truth. Like Jesus said, it's the truth that's going to make us free. It's the truth that's going to turn this thing around. It is the truth about who everyone is that's going to make things better.
Thank you. Dr. Robinson, then I'll come back to you.
tagging on to what Dr. McCoy said, a comfortable Christian or a conservative Christian is an oxymoron.
Absolutely.
Based on the Word of God.
Absolutely.
Because the Word of God pushes us out of those zones. And as we know, Jesus was radical in what he did when he went into the temple. He was radical in getting his point across. And so with the issue of racism, and we certainly appreciate our white brothers and sisters who are marching with us, but we need them also to use their voices on the Hill. We need for them to use their voices in places where decisions and changes are being made. And yet we are seeing a lot of changes as a result of the fact that they have joined in with us on this particular march and this particular protest, because it's like none other. However, but we need them to raise the volume when it comes down to the politicians demanding change, not for us, but with us, because we've been doing it all along. And I think once we target areas and make clarity of them, because, you know, racism is fueled by capitalism. Amen. That's what is fueled by capitalism. Dr. Martin Luther King didn't get killed because of racism. Dr. Martin Luther King was killed because of capitalism. When you start messing with the money, and that's why we got to take it to the politicians. That's why we got to make sure that they understand that we're not just going to walk the street, but we're going to also walk the halls of Congress.
Thank you. Dr. McCoy, you had a follow-up?
Yes, and I get a lot of comments from my white colleagues, and perhaps that's not an accurate term. I don't see them as colleagues, but I need to say counterparts. And the criticism that I normally get is the fact that why does there have to be a black church? We keep talking about the black church, the black church, the black church, and I often respond to them that it was not due to the efforts of African Americans to create the black church. The black church grew out of the fact that black persons of color were not accepted as full members in the white church. Mm-hmm. In 1845, the Southern Baptist Church rejected and supported slavery and integration. And it was not until 1995, 150 years later, that they set forth an apology. During that time, the anger of African American persons, when we look at the negative ramifications of Reconstruction, when we look at the Supreme Court decision, Plessy versus Ferguson, when we look at the Dred Scott decision, of course, when we look at systemic segregation in America, I have not seen where many so-called white preachers have supported the civil rights movement. And so therefore, in this 21st century, and we hate to utilize the term, but it seems to be apropos, as Malcolm said, it appears as if the chickens have come home to roost. And so therefore, it is imperative for the church to deal with this issue of racism, because it's not going to go away on its own. Someone said something to the effect that power does not concede without a demand. And I believe that it is time for the African American church and African American people to make a demand and not simply a request. Someone said that America should be grateful that all we're seeking is equal rights instead of revenge. And so therefore, we need to get on equal footing so that we can move forward in this time to eradicate racism from the soil of America.
Well, Thank you. You jumped ahead on something that I was going to talk about later, but I might as well just follow up right here. So what does the Black church specifically want out of this protest? Do you have any goals or demands?
Shall I answer?
Sure, go right ahead.
Well, the first thing, of course, we want in the climate in which we are presently living is reform in the recruitment and training of police. The fact that black persons, particularly black young men, are stopped at a higher rate, particularly in the nation's capital, than persons of other cultures, is suggestive of the fact that there's targeting our people. So the first thing we want is reform in the recruitment and then in the training of white policemen. I have been a victim of being stopped by white police for minor infractions, and the humiliation that I experienced was unbelievable. And I am an older black man who has some kind of discipline. But I can understand how younger men of color who've not yet developed the discipline allow their anger to override their wisdom, and they will respond negatively. So that's one thing, and I can outline others, but I'll allow my colleagues to share in what is our demand.
Yeah, what we all want as African Americans, and then today even white Americans, is justice that's fair for all, not for some. Mm-hmm. I look at the Justice Department as criminal. To incarcerate the vast amount of African American men, many of whom have been unjustly treated, even when it comes to plea bargaining and all of that, and threats, and to have a justice for us where you can lock us up just about for anything, and then the police, whose job is to protect, serve and protect, they are inflicting injustice on us. And so they have the badge and they have the gun, and now this institutional racism, or the systemic racism, is now taking charge of what they are doing and how their practices, as though their practices of injustice towards people of color has become the norm. And just a week or so ago, the police were protesting how they were being treated with the same laws. And so they have in their mind a law for them, the impunity. They can commit crimes and not be held responsible for. To me, this is unjust. This is the Justice Department being unjust toward the citizen of color. And what we want is just fair justice, justice for all. They sent us to these prisons, these state prisons, and then have the audacity or the temerity to say, to distinguish crime as white-collar crime, blue-collar. This is crazy. A crime is a crime, as according to justice. And if white men are crime, some of these people, these rich people, they're not going to prison. They're going to golf clubs. This is not just. This is not justice, and all of that. And so all we want is fair justice, and not to be racially profiled. White men, white people are doing the same thing as black people, but disproportionately, we are targeted. Mm-hmm. And so we know this is not just. We don't need to have a whole lot of education, and a whole lot of intellect, a whole lot of wisdom to know this is wrong. And so we just want fair justice. There's justice for all, and not to be targeting us because racism from the very beginning of this country had made us as African people 3/4 of a human being. I mean, 3/5 of a human being. And so even when some of the Christian or the white folk decided to evangelize us, they were not necessarily evangelizing us for the sake of saving our soul, but as Dr. Robinson said, for capitalism.
And to control us.
To control us, so that we wouldn't rebel and all of those kinds of things. And we just want, and then white people calling this their country, as though we had nothing to do to make this country as wealthy as it is. And we never got our share. And what we want is reparation. And we talk about the plan now, but I believe that the young people and the protesters pushing this, or to push this, we don't need small changes. We had those in the 60s. We need some radical changes. We need these little steps that Congress has start talking about giving us. You're not giving us anything. We have a right to this, and it's just time that they know it. And I'm so happy that these protesters are out there pushing this. And this is our time. And we just want to encourage people, to encourage those that are out there. Don't let up. And as strange as it may seem, this coronavirus, this pandemic, has afforded us to pay attention to this racism that many have not paid attention to, and allowed us, because many of these protesters, they're not working, and they're out there. And so God is a strange and mysterious God, and he knows when to do what. And we see, as African people, as white people, we're saying, this is the time to bring race, to destroy racism. And so, and that's going to look different, and people are afraid of this. And white folk ought to be happy that black folk are not necessarily like them in vengeance. And I think that's what a lot of white people that's holding on to racism, they are afraid of that. That if they ever allow us to be equal, if they ever take their knee off of our necks, we will rise to an occasion and remember what they have done to us for 400 years and turn that back on them. But from my point, black people are not like that. We just want what's fair. We don't, and Congress has a tendency of manipulating the laws so that they can get off. This is institutional racism. They manipulate the law so that they can get off, and we go to jail. And to me, this is criminal. When you manipulate the law to get out of a particular crime, you know it's a crime, but you manipulate it, and you pass laws. It's still happening today under the administration, the current administration today. They're manipulating laws, and they're going above and saying we are in power and we can do this. It's just a matter of time, and this is history all over the world, for the common people to overtake the government.
Thank you for that impassioned response. Did either of you have a response to the question?
Right now.
So I agree with Dr. McCoy and Dr. Wimbish. I think we want, well, I know we want justice for all people, real justice, not a shadow of it because I'm black, or a shadow of it because we want true justice for all people. And the other thing we want is for the rules to change, for all the training to change, not just for the white police. And I say that because, you know, I was on law enforcement side, and the training is geared to, as a law enforcement officer, I see everything black as the enemy. Our scenarios are based on black kids, black men. So all the training needs to change. We want all the police training to change. We want the folks at the top of the police chain to be removed because, see, they still have that hatred in here. And what I learned coming up is that when they have that hatred in here, because I used to have one of my best friends when I was coming up was a white guy until we got into an argument. And when we got into a debate, an argument, you know, I became that end. This was my best friend because it's still in there. So we want all of these leaders, you know, that was raised with this, that had this racism instilled in them from childhood. We want them removed. We don't want to be forgiven for being black. We want to be respected. So those are the things that I think we want.
Thank you.
And just to add to that,
Let me. I was going to say,
Well, I want to go a little further than police reform. We need police reform. We need to, because what we need, and I reverberate what everybody else has said, justice and equality.
Absolutely.
We need police reform, definitely. I agree with what everyone said. We need prison reform.
Absolutely. Yes.
We need the prison. We need the probation system reformed.
Absolutely.
We need the justice system reformed. You know, as it always been mentioned, that we got two sets of laws. But when we look at the history of these laws, it's hard to ignore the disparities. We African American people make up 13% of the population of America. We make up 13%. We make up 60% of the prison population. And those are startling statistics there. It shows the disparity within the system. The parole system need to be reformed. I heard Van Jones on CNN say the other day that Ahmaud Brooks, who was killed in Atlanta, he wasn't running. Excuse me. Ahmaud Arbery, yeah. Brooks, yeah, Brooks in Atlanta. Yeah, he was running simply because he had been to prison. He had been paroled. He had a monitor on his ankle, and he didn't want to go back for a little small offense, a little small crime. And that's what the system does. Once we get in the system, it's almost impossible to get out. Because the least little thing that we do, or the least little thing that we do allegedly, we're going back to the system. And so there needs to be a reform in the parole. And that's why I call it capitalism that fuels racism, because capitalism gives everybody a job. It gives the parole officer a job, it gives the social workers a job, it gives the judge a job, it gives the lawyers a job, it gives the correctional officers a job, you know, and to add insult to injury, we have private prisons that are owned by individuals who are profiting because they are profiting by keeping the beds in the prisons full. So I mean, you know, so capitalism fuels racism, and then we have this remodeling of the city, and we know what that is, you know. Where they, yeah, we know what that is. They kicking us out. That's gentrification. They kicking us out. There was an incident that happened downtown last year where 6 youth, and I am not condoning the action of these youth, but there was 6 youth who jumped on one white person and took their wallet and the cell phone. It was downtown on 8th Street. Around 3rd and 2nd Street on 8th Street. and I'm not condoning this, but when the white guy was interviewed, he said this, and I thought he nailed it. He said, well, you know, I understand the tension of the young African Americans in Washington, D.C. He said, when they can see us erecting all of these buildings downtown, changing the face of downtown, that look so rich, while they're living on the other side, and while all have been kicked out of the city, and there's nothing that's being built for entertainment or recreation for them. Absolutely. And I'm not condoning what they did, and I'm not saying or excusing what they did, but I'm saying that how are we going to erect millions of dollars, and in some areas they've spent billions of dollars erecting these high-rise, these condos, these magnificent buildings, and have absolutely nothing in place for these young people to do. And they don't have recreation centers like they used to have in every community. Like when I was coming up, there were recreation centers because they were cut from the budget from the government, and so now they don't have recreation centers. So what our young people are doing today, they're making their own recreation, and their own recreation is turning out to be dangerous.
All right. Did we have one more follow-up to this question? Which one?
All right. This has to do with what we want.
Right.
We certainly want reform in the prison system. Those that are released, coming home, are facing what Michelle Alexander said, called the new Jim Crow.
That's right.
And so what we want is for applications for jobs. Why is it that on the application it says, have you ever been arrested? If you already paid your time,
absolutely,
do you have to live with that? Do you have to suffer the rest of your life because of that? We want that taken off. We want the protesting in various areas of prison reform and housing injustice and educational injustice. We want that turned. We know, so we have to have groups that are focused on reforming returning citizens so that they can return and get jobs and deal with their children that need their fathers and their mothers so badly. But they go to fill out applications, and if they get a job, they got to lie about it. Why is that on there? And if we really wanted to straighten out some of this stuff, why is it on a job application? What race are you? What difference does it make if we're going to have the United States of America? What difference does it mean, especially if we dismantle racism? Why is that on there? I mean, why is that on there anyway? What color are you? Or what race are you? I'm a human being. Give me a job. I'm a human being. I paid my debt to society. Why should I have to answer this? And so that's what we want.
All right. Thank you so much.
And if we had to prioritize what we want, the first thing we want and is the end of police violence against our young men. That's our priority. That's number one. I think that's going to get the protesters out of the streets. And I'm just amazed that in the midst of these protests, we are still hearing incidences of over-policing, police violence. In the midst of all of these protests, in the midst of all of these cameras and those kind of things, when the police department knows that what you do will be shown, and yet there's such a lack of restraint until they cannot stop these instances of violence, police violence against our sons. And finally, I have 7 grandsons, and many of them are all of them are of driving age. And I asked my grandson recently, what do you think when you are driving down the street and a police car gets behind you? And sadly, he said, Granddad, my first thought is, will I make it home to see my family. That bothered me. And therefore, the first thing we want is the end of police violence against our young men. And there's a litany of other things.
Right.
But certainly that ought to be number one.
Okay, so I'm going to ask you this question. The President of the United States and many law enforcement officials say that the current issues with police brutality are simply the result of a few bad apples. So what do you think about this?
I must address this because I've heard that argument. I've heard that argument from police chiefs and sheriffs throughout this county. And my response to that is, it's not a few bad apples. Those bad apples have to fall from some tree. And so therefore, I believe that the tree, the system, is responsible for those few bad apples. And so therefore, until the system changes, there will always be bad apples falling from a corrupt and rotten tree.
Amen.
The president, along with some of the administrators, his administration, won't even recognize that there is institutional or systemic racism. And therefore, if they don't recognize it, they're not going to do much to address it. It says, give them a little something to appease them, and so this stuff can die down. They won't recognize it. And again, I'm quoting from Tisby's book, The Compromise, Racism in the Church, that if there's going to be reconciliation, and that's a lot that we want too. We want reconciliation. We want that we could all just get along and work together. But racism is not our sin, black folks' sin. We did not cause racism. This is white folks' sin, and they need to repent. And if they don't recognize, if they won't even acknowledge that this institutional racism or this systemic racism exists, they're not going to be sorry about this. And if there is no repentance, there's not going to be any reconciliation. And repentance must follow, as Tisby said, confession. And confession must deal with the truth. And so we're right back to that first question about the education, or the theological education in the churches. We've got to preach truth. And we've got to empower people with the truth, that they may be courageous enough, like these young people, to go out and speak truth to power and not back down. Stay there. Now, in my generation, the baby boomers, we marched with King and those, we made a trail. I'm hoping and praying that these young people today will put some cement to put this trail where anybody and everybody can cross it without any discrimination. And we're right at that point where we can bring racism down. But we have to let these protesters know we are with you. We are praying for you. We want that you don't let up, because it's not we the government, it's we the people.
Mm-hmm. I take issue with the issue of recognize. I think they clearly recognize these issues, but I think they intentionally look the other way. Heard someone say that you can be in an advantaged position so long until equality looks like oppression. And so therefore, we find persons who have been in the dominant culture and in the position of advantage so long until equality appears to them as if they are being oppressed.
To you two, what do you think about the bad apples question?
I agree with the two doctors here. The bad apples. So Dr. McCoy said the bad apple has to fall from the tree, which means the tree is bad. I would go a little further and say the entire vineyard needs to be burned down, because the training, the same takedown methods are being taught across the nation in some places, in other countries, because these takedown methods have proven to be effective. So it's the whole system. It's the whole vineyard. It's not just a few bad apples.
Concerning the bad apple issues, that's the response from an immoral system dealing with a moral situation. It's almost impossible for him to see the real issue because, you know, you can't take a moral complaint to an immoral system and expect to get the right response.
Amen. Amen. Amen.
Thank you for that.
I don't want to totally demonize the police, because I know that there are some good police.
Absolutely.
There's some good police. The problem that I have with the good policemen is their silence to speak up against another officer who's right. And that, to me, that's the core of some of the policing problems, the unions and, what do you call it, the Blue Shield?
The Blue Shield.
Yes. And they are afraid to speak against that for retaliation from their brothers and other police officers. And if that is not taken down, I don't see anything changing.
Amen.
But let me. I think we all agree that all the police officers are not bad.
Right.
All of them are not bad. And what the president is speaking about is basically making excuses for those who are imposing their own will and their own agenda, which in a system that has allowed it.
And I'm sorry, but so we agree that all the police are not bad. And I just want to just touch on this training piece. So as a Marine, I was trained to respond a certain way in certain circumstances. And it didn't matter how I thought. It didn't matter how I felt. When these circumstances happened, I would automatically respond. And that's how the police are, even the good police. Certain circumstances, they've been trained to respond a certain way. It's their response that's not right, because that's how they've been trained. So even the good police, they have bad training. So the training has to change.
Thank you.
When we asked the police, we know there's going to be crime. As long as we are people, we have to deal with our sinfulness. So we're going to need the police. We're going to call the police on various occasions. Police will say, I said, why not just shoot and maim the person? So we're not, as Reverend Thomas was saying, said we're not trained to maim people, we're trained to kill.
Absolutely.
That has to change.
That has to change.
Because a lot of these police are marksmen, and so they can hit you in the leg, but the police says, even the good police say, we're not trained that way. We're trained to shoot, to kill.
Mm-hmm.
Same as.
So what organizations can Christians support financially or otherwise in this movement to end police brutality and systemic racism in America?
May I start? All right. I'm a little bit ashamed of this, but let's say the truth will just help you out. One of the organizations that I know of and I knew of that was out front fighting legally was NAACP. And I kind of sat back to watch to see what they were doing. Basically, 90% of what they were doing I was for, but never actually supported them, never actually became a member. And so recently, as from the pulpit, as a pastor, I'm also a pastor, preaching to the people, because I preach to a lot of the congregation that I preach to, they're seniors. And I said, okay, listen, you may not be able to get out there and protest and march up and down the street. I said, but you can find out where they're marching to and get there. But one of the other things I was sharing, preaching across the pulpit on Sunday morning, is to join some of the organizations that need financial supporting. We know as people, we got to put our money where our mouth is. And so I said, listen, join the NAACP, join the Urban League, or support the Congressional Black Caucus, those kind of things. And so I recently joined the NAACP just a few weeks ago. And I'm not proud about that, but at least I can say I'm helping financially them and plan to do whatever I can to help, because I know we need these lawyers. We need them to argue, to show up, to make our cases, and they're able to articulate and express what's on our minds and what's on our heart better than many of us. And so we appreciate these men and women. I'm listening to the chairperson of the Congressional Black Caucus, Bass, and she's out there, and she's pushing it. And I said, those are the people that I want to support financially. If I can't march with them, I can send in my money. And even as African American, we have a tendency to think that a dollar doesn't mean anything. And I really want to change that concept. I don't care if you send them $1, it'll help. And if you send in $20, that'll be great. Send in $100, that'll be even better. And you can become a member of the NAACP with silver stuff. Send in $5,000. And so I want to move to that. I want my money to work for me. And so if I can have these people arguing for what we feel that's just, then do it.
Uh-huh. Any other organizations?
I agree with Dr. Wimbish, the NAACP, and the Black Caucus. Also like it's called the Poor People Campaign. I think that's a great work that's being done. And let me say this: I wish and pray that we could get to a point where we can answer that question, that we could say, financially support your church that's engaged in the struggle. Because I mean, the civil rights movement, we know that it was the church. It was the church. I like to think about that. But unfortunately, many of our churches have gotten away from being on the front line and really getting in the trenches. I like to think that one day we'll be able to answer that question and at least point out a few churches. And I'm sure there are some churches that's doing a great work and in the trenches and on the front line. But I'm talking about if we could just imagine the churches that's all over the place coming together, the conferences and the conventions, the National Baptist Convention, the Progressive Convention, and they are doing a great work, and they do have a social justice department. However, I think that the people need to support them a little more so that they can become more visible.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. And now on to my last question. We know that the current excitement around the movement will eventually die down. And When this happens, how will the Christian leadership keep the protest movement going, and what are your next steps?
All right. This was another plan that I had that I'm sharing with congregants, the members. That is, as African American people, we don't utilize or even know the person that are representing us in our county and the police department. We need to be able to know the commanders, the majors, and others that are there, the congressmen, the senators, the school boards. On a large scale, in my mind, I don't think that we know them, and so I'm asking the congregation, and I'm going to be supplying on a weekly basis numbers for members to put in their cell phone contacts, so their contact. So, and I say, you can call them. And I learned a long time ago that when one congressperson receives a letter, to them that is equivalent to 100 votes. And so they're going to respond. We just have to start using and holding those elected officials accountable to represent us. Because whether or not we voted for them, you are our senator, you are our governor, you are our Congress person. And we have this on our mind. And so we can contact them, we can email them, we can, with the social media, and all of these people in Congress and the representatives and the school board have emails. And so we need to, going forward, after the protest dies, we can continue to do that. And even have in our churches a moment that we take to share what's happening on a broader basis. And so we'll share that. And right in our midst of our Sunday morning is when African American, we have always received vital information at the church. And so every church, every pastor should be thinking about what vital information I'm going to share with the congregation this morning, or even allow different ministries to have a moment of reflection. You got 60 seconds, you got 1 minute to tell us something that can empower us in a political way, in an economical way, to start doing that when the protesting dies down.
All right, thank you. Yes, Dr. McCoy.
Yes, to bring both of your last questions together, I believe that it is vital that the one organization that we need to support in a larger way, and that is the church. The church has always been there in moments of great struggle that relates to African American people. And in fact, I would venture to say that the church is the only organization that our people truly trust. And so I would say that the church needs to keep this movement going. Of course, this is a moment in history for our country, but as we always say, that we want to turn this moment into a movement. And so therefore, the church must not be silent. The church must move forward. In addition to that, I believe that we need to support our historical black colleges as we are experiencing across this country the closing of historical black colleges and universities. And so therefore, the pipeline of information is being squeezed like a hole because these historical black universities and colleges are certainly dying out, and therefore the information and the education that they provide our people and that they empower our people with, of course, is waning as well. And I must make a special plug for the Washington Baptist Seminary because the Washington Baptist Seminary is an institution designed to empower our people with the truth. And so therefore, if we want to make this moment into a movement, we must begin to look to ourselves and not to other institutions that we think have our best interests at heart. We need to look to those institutions that we know and have a proven track record that have our best interests at heart.
I think that we need to continue to encourage our members in the church to exercise their power. Like Dr. Wimbish said, write your congressman. You know, you have a right. Exercise those rights. We need to also, you know, when we were worried about terrorism, the federal government put out the statement, you see something, say something. I think we need to exercise that within the churches, because there's so much that's not being said. We see a lot. There's a lot going on, and this carries over to, you know, when we leave the church, this practice. So we need to encourage our members. If it's wrong, say something. Speak up. Don't be afraid to speak up. Encourage them to speak up. Encourage them to stand. Like the Bible says, we as Christians, we stand for righteousness' sake. But that's not happening if you're not saying anything. So we need to encourage our members to speak up. Say something. Don't be afraid. Be bold. The Bible says Jesus is looking for bold Christians, and we have to be bold, not just in the church, but if we practice that in the church, it'll carry over, you know, to wherever we go. So I think that that's what's going to help the movement continue on. Dr. Barnes?
Well, I have two parts to this question, short term and long term. The short term, I think, as it deals with the current issues where we are right now, I think we ought to, as Pastor Wimbish said, we ought to inform our members, and we need to be informed ourselves about the platform that they're running on. Because, you know, there's a lot of them now who have recognized the protest and they recognize change. But I think we need to be equipped ourselves to bring it and put it in layman's term, or on a level where even a young person can understand the platform that they're running on. Our congressmen, our senators, our you know, government officials, when it comes up, you know, because a lot of times I have people call me and they'll say, well, I know I'm voting for the Democrats, you know, well, who? I see two names. Okay, let's make ourselves familiar with these names. Let's make ourselves familiar with the platform that they're running on so that we can make the right choice. And then not only that, I think we ought to start putting things in place right now, using the church van or whatever, and we don't know what the situation is going to be with the coronavirus, but getting people to the polls. We need to get people to the polls. Amen. We need to vote. We need to get people to the polls like we did when Barack Obama was running for president. We had all kinds of strategies how we were getting people to. We need to do that now and start getting people to the polls. Well, plan to get people to the polls, and the churches need to come together so that we'll make sure that even if a person needs transportation, that we can do that. I mean, I have a couple of 15-passenger van. Well, for social distancing, I should at least be able to get 5 on that van.
Amen.
You know, so get them to the polls. And then we ought to do what we can, because we can't do everything, but we can do something. We ought to find out and get more information on the demonstration that's going to be here August the 28th. The demonstration is going to be here August 28th here in Washington, D.C., where we can, you know, I've already, actually, I got 3 vans. I got one of them is a cargo van, and I've already put some things in place where that van is going to go downtown full of ice cold water. And then I'm thinking about putting together a grill a huge grill so that we can serve hot dog. I mean, I'm not talking about charging. I'm talking about giving them away. These type of things we need to get involved in and get the attention of America about this rally that's going to be on August the 28th. Now, I'm not certain, but I understand that President Barack Obama is going to be part of the planning with that. But nevertheless, and I hope he is. Because that's one of the things I think we're missing. We're missing a voice that will take leadership for our people and unite everybody together. And I personally, my opinion, I think Barack Obama is the best person that can do that. But then the long-term goal, I think, to continue after the protests, I think that theological institutions and churches alike, but mainly Christian schools and theological institutions, need to have a semester on social justice. We need to have somebody who's affluent with the system, and somebody who knows the law, and I think that ought to be a course in our theological system that will align with the principles of the Bible.
Just one other thing, and I'm done.
All right. The last word.
We understand the intimidation or the trepidation of our people whose education may be somewhat limited, and they don't know how to speak to representatives. You know, they're intimidated by that. That happens even in the school system. Some parents won't go up to the school because some of the teachers sometimes might belittle them because of their grammar and all of that kind of stuff. And people have this trepidation. But we have social media that makes it a whole lot easier just to send to your representative a statement. Oh, you're doing great. Or we need certain things in our community. We can use social media as as what's happening now is the social media stuff. And so we can use that to speak to these people in power.
All right.
True.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you all for your great insights and for your time. And thank you for joining us. If you'd like to learn more about the Washington Theological Seminary, look at the link below and learn more information about them. Thank you for joining us.